That was Katie O'Brien there. We'll move on to the next story in the Times is that FIFA are reviewing its gender eligibility rules. So FIFA has confirmed it's reviewing its gender eligibility regulations as world's sports governing bodies scramble to establish policies that will make their competitions fair and inclusive across the board. The inadequacy or absence of existing gender policies was brought into sharp focus this week when swimming body FINA announced a ban on athletes who have gone through male puberty from competing in women's events. In addition, FINA announced it would work to establish a separate open category for swimmers whose gender identity is different from the sex they were assigned when they were born. A FIFA spokesperson said it was not in a position to go public on prospective changes to its existing gender policy, but confirmed a review is currently taking place. The spokesperson said FIFA is currently reviewing its gender eligibility regulations in consultation with expert stakeholders. FIFA thereby takes guidance from many stakeholders, medical, legal, scientific performance, and human rights, as well as the November 2021 IOC framework on fairness, inclusion, and non-discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sex variations. So we've seen a lot of changes go on in the past couple of years, but particularly in the last week. That's the third governing body that has taken some form of action on transgender athletes competing against women. Is it a matter of time before we see some of this moving closer to home?
Yes, I think it's a straight answer, Niamh, to that question. Absolutely. And look, with FIFA, as usual, I wouldn't be relying on FIFA to take the lead on anything. They've obviously sat back and watched very carefully what the swimming and rugby league as well have decided to do. And I think the key thing you mentioned there in the newspaper passage is the lack of policies. So like anything, you start going into gender eligibility and talking about regulations without policies. What you do is you leave yourself open to litigation, probably from the athletes. And I think that's only fair. A transgender athlete who wants to swim in world championships, who wants to play rugby league, or who wants to play at an international level, will have the right to have their say, both in court and probably through the media as well. The thing is, with gender eligibility, it's like, the consultations with expert stakeholders. FIFA have been putting out all these kind of sound bites during the week. I think like the others, they're just waiting. They're standing back to see the first person to come out and question this and openly and correctly question this. Look, it's such an emotive subject, and it's easy to turn around and say, oh, well, if the swimming authorities, if rugby league and if FIFA are doing it, then everyone's going to say the same thing, and that's the end of it. It certainly is not. And one of the things I found interesting as well this week, just in reading up on it, like FIFA have been saying it'll be in a case by case basis, which I mean, that now alone is opening themselves to
that sounds problematic.
Yeah, and it does. And what it does is it kicks the problem down the road. It's not, sorry, not a problem, but it kicks the issue down the road. It's not a problem, it's an issue, apologies. And that's not actually grasping the situation or what we actually need are the governing bodies to come together and to make a definitive subject on it. Because I think swimming kind of said something like FINA and the swimming authority said that, look, an open category is possible here. An open category being just for transgender. Now, I'm not sure a transgender athlete would want that. I'm sure a transgender athlete, be a he or she, will want to go and do and compete at the level that they feel they're entitled to compete at.
Yeah.
Bottom line with this, Niamh, is, as you said, it's an emotive subject. It's not going to be solved this week. It's not going to be solved in the next couple of years. It's going to run and run and run until it's taken to the highest possible, I think, legal authorities, and somebody finally makes a definitive subject or decision on it. But just to finish on it, I think the fact that FIFA have come in after FINA and the Rugby League, I think FIFA are probably the biggest organisation with the biggest clout, and that's drawn a lot of headlines, and I think it will push it on a little bit further and maybe a bit quicker, but I don't see an end in sight. I just don't see an end in sight, because a transgender athlete will question this and will look to do what they think is fair to them, and which they have every absolute right to do.
Yeah, no, I think, it is interesting that more organizations are talking about it, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later. You're completely correct. Like, it's not going to be solved this year in terms of, finding a place for everybody in sport and figuring out what the fairest way is for everybody to be allowed to compete. But it is good that we're seeing some of the international bodies, starting to explore it a bit more. Hopefully it will, as you said, there will be more definitive decision making happening. Something that stood out to me and that I thought was interesting was that, FINA are talking about that open category. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I thought it was I thought it's a good stance. It's a good position to be doing that.
It's a start, and it's an open category for trans women in some events. is what they've said. And there again, there's the words that worry me are some events and, you know, hoping to create a working thing. Like when you hear words like that, it is encouraging. But again, I go back to the athlete. What does the athlete want? What does the athlete say in this?
Yeah, well, I think the sum, like you have to be fair to the organizations, and like you have to think about like the start of the, you know, the Olympic and the Paralympic Games, like from I can't remember exactly, but I believe the Paralympics started with like 5 sports. So that's only some sports. Like you have to start somewhere. And if you think of the likes of swimming, like up until you know, this Olympic Games, I believe, you know, it was 800 meters for women and 1500 meters for men, and that was it. Where last in 2020, or well 2021 it was, a man could race 800 meters or 1500, and the saying that 800 was available for women and 1500 available for men. So you're not always going to cater for everything. Like for a sport like swimming, there's an extensive list of events, and if you have too many events, and I think part of the difficulty that we're going to see, probably particularly at international level, is that you may not actually have enough people subscribed to compete in an open category. So if you have too many events on offer, you're going to have one person in one event, one person in another event, and there's going to be no competition. So I think from in their defense in that respect, you know, maybe like starting off with 4 is something that's reasonable if you want people to actually be able to compete.
I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, if I'm a transgender athlete, do I want to compete in an event with 4 other transgender athletes, or do I feel I deserve to be in the other one? And that's really that's what's going to come down to. I think the open category, in theory, is an idea that might work, but the reality is
the open category open. Is it just for transgender athletes, or can anybody enter it?
Good question. That's a very good question.
For me, open category, until you kind of mentioned it there, like the open category that I would see is that actually anybody can go and enter it, and that's how it works. And I think that could be something that's interesting, and whoever's the fastest is the fastest, and it's open for everybody to be involved in.
I think we go back to it. It's inclusivity again. There's so many, like, and this is now critical time for this decision. I think that we both agree on that it's come to the point now when FIFA are getting involved that a decision has to be made or a policy has to be drawn up. But until a policy is drawn up that everybody agrees on, that nobody's going to agree on, I don't know how long this is actually going to take. An open category in theory is a good idea, I think, but I go back to it. If I'm a transgender athlete, why should I have to go into an open category? Why can I not be in the category that I think I belong in? And that's where the crux of the issue will lie. It will go to court, it will be litigated, and then a decision will have to be made. And then who knows after that? But until all the other main sporting organizations, the Olympics included, come in together and come to some sort of an agreement. I don't think they're going to come to sort of a common policy, but they have to have some sort of policy before they start making these decisions. And that's the problem now. Now there's a push on, but there's no policy to fall back on it. So we don't know where we are.
I think what's important is the communication between the organizations. But I interviewed Joanna Harper. She's a trans runner. Her transition was from male to female, and she actually evaluated, she's done a lot of the science on it, and I think is in a very unique position to be able to have experienced herself and have done the science on researching the impact of transitioning on one's body, because I know a lot of people are talking about you know, the differences of going through male puberty versus female puberty, and testosterone, among other things. And the, you know, advantages or, you know, disadvantages that an athlete could be at based on the how they went through puberty, I suppose. But like she said, as somebody that had gone through the transition and who's doing all the research, that like there are physiological you know, differences there that can't be ignored. And I think while what you're saying around, you know, where are trans athletes going to see themselves competing, and there also has to be an understanding across the board from the governing bodies to athletes of whatever background, that there are physiological differences, and you can't, I think, get into competing in sport and just say because you feel you belong there that it's reasonable to expect to be able to maybe compete in a category when the science is there, which, you know, it is growing and there's a lot of further research has to be done. But there are physiological differences, so you can't be naive, and people can't just say because they feel that they belong in some events that like I understand, you know, going to court might happen, but there's going to have to be definitive decisions to make sure that it is fair across the board.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a definitive endpoint on this, because so many different organizations, Niamh, and I don't disagree with what you've said there, and the person that you would have interviewed and the science that is there.
Yeah,
if different organizations,
there's a long way to go on the science, don't get me wrong, like she said, because part of it is like the amount of trans athletes in the world is so much smaller than people think. That's the thing.
For now, but like the policy has to sit there for the future and has to be reviewed down through the years. So in time, who knows how many will be there in terms of competing, and transgender athletes want to compete at the highest level. But I go back to it, whether you're transgender or not, if you're an athlete, you want to compete at the highest level. So you're going to want to compete against the best. So an open category for transgender, while it makes sense on paper, it's not until you actually ask the athlete in question, well, what is it this you're looking for? And that's where the crux is. And my big worry with it is, because no one wants to touch the subject, because it's taken so long for it to come to a head now, and because FIFA have weighed in only after FINA said what they said, and Rugby League did the same, we won't get a common policy across all these organizations. So it will vary. So a transgender athlete, when it comes to football, might be different. The rules might be slightly different when it comes to, again, for swimming. And where's the inclusivity?
Yeah, well, that's the thing that Joanna was saying, was that for some events, depending on the physiological changes as somebody transitions, that there will potentially be some events where trans women and biological women can compete on pretty much an even playing field, like things like ultra marathons and stuff. Like women are winning ultra marathons outright, so that the physiological advantages or disadvantages, there's not really something there. But then she was saying about power and strength based sports, that's where you may not be able to have trans women competing in women's events. So I think it might be time to catch up with Joanna again and see what her science has said, and see what her opinions are on it, because it's certainly a subject that we're all trying to learn more and more about all the time.
Yeah, I think we'll be talking about this again, Niamh, very soon and in time, but it needs to be talked about, and it needs to be talked about. I suppose it needs to be debated in the public forum to keep it at the front. Like, as you said, there's no straightforward answer to it, but I always go back to the athlete.
Yeah.
Transgender and whatever, transgender or not, what is the athlete going to want? They're going to want to compete in the highest possible competition. And if an open category is not that, then they're going to question it, and they're going to possibly, rightly in some cases, but in terms of inclusivity, in terms of fairness, until we have a common policy, which we won't have, but until we've proper regulated policies for each of those organizations, I think this is going to run and run.
Mm-hmm. No, it certainly is going to take quite an amount of time. So it'd be something we'd be, constantly watching out for. I'll ask one more question. It's not an easy one on this topic, but, we're talking about the elite side of things, but there also is, local and domestic competition as well. And, for every, young girl, young boy, trans athlete or not, it's what they're competing at locally is the biggest thing for them. How do you think we should navigate competition domestically that's not international competition to make sure that it's inclusive and fair for everybody that's involved?
I don't think you can at non-international level is my honest answer, and I don't mean to be smart about the people that I'm talking about here. A young transgender athlete just wants to be an athlete, and especially young kids and very young kids at a tentative age, you've got to be extremely careful with, especially like the older generations, your wording and how you speak and how you talk around the subject. I mean, at international level, you're talking about people that have matured at a certain age, physiologically and mentally, so they know the extra strain that comes with being a transgender athlete. Unfortunately, they're probably getting ready to use to handle that. But for a kid in a national meet, or a kid just in an ordinary athletics meet, I think who they are is more important than what type of athlete they are. I don't think it, again, I think this will become, I don't think there's anything you can do about it right now in terms of how do you regulate it or how do you assess it. I think until we go back to it, until there's an international policy that can be fed down to national level, there's nothing you can do. There's things you can question, there's things you can argue, but it's continue. And as time goes on, Niamh, this is the thing, there may be only a small number of transgender athletes out there at the moment, but that will grow as time goes on. And we need to look down the road 20, 25 years as well, where will we be with it? And the policy has to be careful to reflect that and to be as inclusive. I go back to the word again, it's got to be as inclusive as possible. I mean, I finish the point. If you're a young kid, a transgender athlete, and you're at a local meeting, you're told, well, you can't run in the big race here, but there's an open category for yourself and one other person to run in. How does that make them feel? Is that what they actually want to do, or do they actually just want to run the race that they feel they belong in? And that's what it boils down to. There's no right or wrong answer, unfortunately, at the moment, but we're looking for guidance from the very top, and we haven't got it yet because we don't have the regulation. But, you know, I think just being as fair as you possibly can to young people, especially at that point in their lives, is more important than any race or who they're racing against.